What if I told you that the inner peace you're searching for isn't found in acquiring a new skill, reading another book, or learning a new meditation technique? What if the secret to a profound, personal transformation isn't about adding, but about subtracting? The counterintuitive truth is that the relentless pursuit of happiness, as the unconscious society teaches us, is precisely what keeps us trapped. It's a cruel paradox. To finally find what you're looking for, you must stop searching and start abandoning. A true spiritual awakening isn't a grand fanfare or a sudden explosion of light. It's a much more intimate and silent process. It's the courage to, one by one, abandon the mental and emotional habits that everyone around you practices as if they were sacred. It's letting go of behaviors so normalized that no one dares to question them, yet they secretly drain our life force and keep us from our essence. In this video, we're going to dive deep and expose 7 of these unspoken habits. We won't talk about the obvious things like quit smoking. We'll talk about subtle psychological and spiritual mechanisms that people, as they awaken, naturally let go of, often without even realizing it. And the 7th one, in particular, is the most sophisticated trap of all, one that even the most conscious people can fall into. The peace you seek lies on the other side of dismantling these patterns. Many walk through life believing that strength lies in having the last word. In a work meeting, a family discussion, or even an online comment, the urge to prove a point becomes a battle for the ego. This is one of the most subtle traps the mind-unconscious society sets for us. The belief that being right makes us more valuable, more intelligent. It's a relentless quest for external validation that, in truth, never fills the void it seeks to heal. What one discovers during the awakening of consciousness, however, is the hidden cost of this victory. Every argument won can mean a small fracture in a relationship. Every point proven can create silent resentment. The energy spent defending an opinion is immense, a force that could be used to create, to love, to connect. At the end of the day, a person finds themselves holding a trophy, but sitting alone in an empty room, questioning the true value of their achievement. I remember a time, early in my career, when I got into a heated debate about a project's direction. I had all the data, all the logical arguments to prove my way was the right way, and I won. The room fell silent, and my idea was approved, but the price was the team's enthusiasm and the open collaboration we had before. In that awkward silence, I felt one of the first signs of awakening. I realized the cost of winning had been my own inner peace. This need to be right is like living inside a fortress we build ourselves. The walls are high, made of our beliefs and certainties, and we feel safe inside. But over time, we realize the walls that protected us have also become our prison. They isolate us from new landscapes, from the fresh air of other perspectives, and most importantly, from genuine connections with those on the outside, living under a different sky. Beginning to let go of this need is a revolutionary act of undetachment. It's not about becoming passive or having no opinion, but about choosing serenity over being right. It's one of the first steps on the journey of our personal transformation. However, as we abandon this external battle, we often face an even more ingrained internal enemy. Once a person leaves the arena of arguments, a silence settles in, and in that silence, they begin to hear another voice. That of the complaint. It's a constant whisper, almost like background noise in the mind, blaming the past, the circumstances, or other people for one's lack of happiness. The unconscious society thrives on this, creating fragile bonds based on mutual grievances. Complaining about the boss or the government becomes a social sport, a way to avoid the most terrifying task of all, self-responsibility. This habit of blaming is an ingenious defense mechanism. It places us in the comfortable position of the victim, and the victim is always blameless, always on the right side of the story. During an awakening of consciousness, a person starts to see that this position is, in fact, a cage. By handing over the responsibility for your unhappiness to something or someone external, you also hand over the power to change it, becoming a passenger in your own life at the mercy of outside winds. I myself spent years blaming a past family decision for certain difficulties I faced in adulthood. That narrative was my identity, my excuse. Until one day, in a rare moment of clarity, it finally clicked. By holding on to that blame, I was giving the past the power to dictate my present. That was a turning point in my personal transformation. A moment I realized that true freedom wasn't in changing the past, but in taking the helm in the now. Holding on to the habit of complaining and blaming is like trying to navigate a boat with the anchor stuck on the seabed. You spend immense energy, you fight against the tide, you adjust the sails, but you go nowhere. The frustration grows, and you blame the wind, the sea, the boat. The true act of letting go, that leads to my inner peace, is to finally pull up the anchor. It's to stop looking outside and start looking inside, at the mechanism that keeps you stuck. When a person finally pulls up that anchor, the boat begins to move. The feeling is one of power and freedom. However, a new question arises. Where to navigate? Without the weight of blame to define your state, and without the need to be right to define your worth, the mind desperately begins to search for a new map, a new compass. And often, it looks for it in the eyes and approval of others. With the anchor of resentment lifted, the inner journey gains new momentum. But it also reveals the next great obstacle, the addiction to applause. We live in an unconscious society that trains us from a young age to measure our worth through the eyes of others. A like, a compliment, a promotion. Everything becomes a currency we trade for our self-esteem. This desperate race for external validation turns us into actors on our own stage, constantly adjusting our masks to please an audience that, most of the time, is too busy with its own show. What the path of Handi's spiritual awakening reveals is the hungry, insatiable nature of this pursuit. Each dose of approval provides a momentary relief, a peak of euphoria that soon dissipates, giving way to an even greater need. This is the essence of toxic happiness. A smile for the camera while, inside, anxiety consumes you. A person grows tired of performing, realizing that the effort to be liked and accepted is distancing them from who they truly are, creating a chasm between their public image and their private truth. Seeking external validation is like trying to see your reflection in a broken, dirty mirror that belongs to others. Each shard shows you a distorted version of yourself based on the fears, desires, and judgments of whoever holds the mirror. The great act of letting go is to stop trying to piece together these broken fragments and to find your own internal mirror, clean and whole. The image may not always be perfect in the world's eyes, but it is, finally, true and yours. When a person begins to nourish themselves from this internal source of value, they cease to be a supplicant and become the sovereign of themselves. Others' opinions become just that, opinions, not sentences. But this new authenticity brings an unexpected challenge. If you no longer have to perform for others, you also can no longer hide behind a mask of perfection for yourself, which leads us to confront the tyranny of forced positivity. On the path of the unawakening of consciousness, many fall into the trap of believing that enlightenment is a state of perpetual joy. A person might start policing their own feelings, judging themselves as less spiritual for having a bad day. They use spiritual jargon to dodge their own humanity, denying their shadow in the name of an artificial light. What they learn over time is that true evolution isn't about eliminating negative emotions, but about learning to dance with all of them under the light of awareness. I remember a particularly dark period in my life after a major setback. My first instinct was to project strength, to swallow my tears and affirm that everything happens for a reason. But that armor of positivity was heavy and false. The real healing began the night when, all alone, I allowed myself to fall apart. Surrendering to that pain, without judgment, was more powerful than months of forced optimism and marked a turning point in my personal transformation. The performance of happiness is like a house with a flawless facade, freshly painted with a perfect garden. But inside, the foundations are cracked and the walls are moldy. An unconscious society only sees and praises the facade. The true act of spiritual and detachment isn't about touching up the paint, but about going down to the basement with a flashlight and fixing the structure. It's the work no one sees, but it's what keeps the house from collapsing in the first storm, ensuring true inner peace. When a person finally gives themselves permission to be authentically human, something magical happens. Their energy changes. Vulnerability opens the door to deep, genuine connections. While repelling superficial interactions, this newfound integrity begins to challenge the relationships that were built on the fragile foundation of convenience, obligation, or habit. When a person allows themselves to be whole with their light and shadows, they begin to vibrate at a new frequency of authenticity. This new energy acts like a tuning fork, revealing the harmony or dissonance in their relationships. Friendships and bonds that were maintained out of habit, shared history, or social convenience begin to feel strangely uncomfortable. The marked awakening of consciousness brings with it a ruthless clarity about where our energy is nourished and where it is drained. For many, this is one of the most painful stages of the journey. The drifting apart rarely happens with a big conflict. It's a slow, silent parting of ways. Loyalty to the past fights against the needs of the present, creating guilt. This can lead to a period of intense loneliness in awakening. A feeling of no longer belonging to the old world, but not yet having found a new one. It's a test that forces us to choose between our inner peace and social approval. I vividly remember the process of distancing myself from a childhood friend. Our meetings had become a loop of nostalgia and complaints, and I would always leave feeling drained. The decision to lovingly create space was an act of letting go that felt, at the time, like a betrayal. However, in the space that opened up, I found air to breathe and the energy to seek genuine connections based on who I was now, not who I had been. It was a crucial step in my personal transformation. Some relationships are like clothes that once fit you perfectly. You loved them. They protected you, and they were part of who you were. But you grew. Continuing to wear them is not only uncomfortable, but it restricts your movement. Letting go isn't saying the clothes were bad. It's honoring that your size has changed. It's a mature recognition that not everyone is meant to walk with us through every season of our lives. By curating their relationships in this way, a person creates an external environment that reflects their new internal landscape. The circle may become smaller, but its quality is infinitely greater. With a life more aligned and a mind more clear, a very sophisticated trap of the spiritual ego then arises. The temptation to use all this newfound knowledge not to go deeper into life, but to float above it. With a cleaner energetic field and more aligned relationships, the journey of personal transformation reaches a new level of clarity and power. And it is precisely here that one of the most sophisticated traps on the path lies: the spiritual ego. A person may begin to use the very concepts of spiritual awakening as a shield to protect themselves from the complexity of life. Spirituality, which should be a bridge to a deeper experience of reality, becomes a wall to isolate oneself from it. This phenomenon is known as the spiritual bypass. It manifests when someone uses the concept of detachment to justify apathy or the idea that everything is an illusion to invalidate real suffering, both their own and that of others. The search for inner peace turns into an attempt to avoid discomfort at all costs, creating a human who floats above problems but has lost the ability to plant their feet on the ground and truly live. Using spirituality as an escape is like having a treasure map But instead of going on the challenging journey it points to, crossing rivers and mountains, you stay home, merely admiring the map. The real journey requires getting your feet muddy. The human being, with all its mess and glory, is not the obstacle to awakening, it is the path itself. Judging the unconscious society from a pedestal is not enlightenment, it's arrogance. The cure for this escape is embodiment. The act of bringing all this awareness into the body and into daily life. It's to stop trying to escape the world and start fully inhabiting it. And to truly inhabit oneself, one must face one of the greatest fears of the modern human, the absence of noise, the vastness of silence, and what it might reveal to us when we have nowhere left to run. The decision to embody one's truth, to live spirituality in the real world, inevitably leads us to the final frontier, silence. We are immersed in an unconscious society that is terrified of emptiness. Every free moment is filled with music, podcasts, notifications, and endless noise. This constant flight from silence is not an accident. It's a project of mass distraction to keep us away from our own inner landscape, afraid of what we might find there. What we fear in the silence is the truth. When the distractions cease, the mind doesn't go quiet. On the contrary, it screams. All the anxieties, worries, and feelings that were swept under the rug come to the surface. The beginning of the path of the awakening of consciousness is often this brutal confrontation with our own internal chaos. The temptation to turn on the TV or grab the phone is immense because we've been taught to fear this inner dialogue. At the beginning of my journey, silence was my enemy. The first few minutes of meditation were torture, filled with racing thoughts. But by persisting, I learned not to fight, but simply to observe. Gradually, the cacophonous noise turned into a whisper, and eventually into a spacious stillness. It was in that space that I found the deepest inner peace and clarity. Silence stopped being frightening and became my wisest counselor and the fertile ground for my personal transformation. In this sacred silence, all the work of letting go culminates. The need to be right, to blame, to seek validation, to perform, it all dissolves into the vastness of the quiet. You no longer need anyone to tell you who you are, because you can finally hear your own truth. This is the homecoming, the true goal of a spiritual awakening. To find at the center of your own being the peace you so desperately sought in the world outside. We've reached the end of our journey today, but yours is just beginning. The truth that echoes behind everything we've discussed is simple, yet revolutionary. Your personal transformation won't be found in anything you can acquire, but in everything you have the courage to abandon. The awakening of consciousness isn't about becoming someone new. It's about unlearning everything that isn't you, so that your true essence can finally emerge. Knowledge without application is just an illusion. So, I ask you directly, what are you going to do with this? What is the next argument where you will choose your inner peace over choosing to be right? What anchor of blame from your past will you finally lift today to allow your ship to start sailing? What mask of toxic positivity are you exhausted from wearing and ready to let fall to the ground? This path is not the easiest one. It demands brutal honesty with yourself. It might lead you to moments of deep loneliness in awakening as you disidentify from the patterns of the unconscious society. But I guarantee you, the freedom and genuine connections waiting for you on the other side are worth every uncomfortable step. Will you continue to be a well-behaved prisoner of your habits, or will you become the master of your own liberation? If this message resonated with your soul and you are committed to your journey, I want to invite you to continue growing with us. Subscribe now to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single step of this deep exploration. And before you go, leave your mark on this movement. Comment below and tell us which of the 7 habits you commit to observing and beginning to let go of, starting today. Your journey inspires us all,